Webinar. So yeah, welcome. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today here at CTI. We are, of course, here to chat about Drupal, specifically Drupal 7 end of life, which seems to have been kicking around for a little while now, for those of you in the know. But it is officially coming to its end of life. So we're here today to focus on that, but more importantly, actually, what we can do next, hopefully to sort of help you understand how to map that out and what that'll look like moving forwards. Just before we sort of get stuck into the detail, some housekeeping. We are recording this webinar for those of you who are with us. Obviously, we can share this out, and we will be sharing this out with everyone who's attending later. And if you do join us later, you can catch up with the recording in your own time. And as it says there, look, this is an interactive session. We are encouraging Q&A. There's a chat function within your Zoom client. If you want to submit those questions, we're going to go through the webinar and we'll come to those questions and look to address those at the end between myself and my colleague David, who's with us here today. So I'm James. I'm the sales director here at CTI Digital. I've been in sort of agency land, as it were, for about 12, 13 years. And my first stint with digital agency was actually working for a Drupal agency. So I know Drupal pretty well. My first exposure to Drupal was with Drupal 7, going out to clients presenting Drupal 7 and its sort of capabilities, etc. So yeah, been with it pretty much for the whole journey. Excited to be here. And now I'll introduce David.
Hi, so I'm David Bishop. I'm CTI's Drupal Technical Director. Here at CTI, I manage a team of 20 Drupal developers, and we build some pretty big systems. In my past, I've kind of worked with Drupal for about 15 years. First real versions were Drupal 6, Drupal 7, and I've done it in a variety of roles. I've run my own company and built small systems for people. I've worked with teams and built large systems. So, you know, I can fully relate to some of the challenges that you'll be having with regards to where you are with your Drupal 7 journey and kind of considering what you're going to do next.
Thanks, David. So look, we sort of put a bit of an agenda together here. I think the first sort of key thing that we're going to look at is why businesses have remained loyal to Drupal 7. Loyal is a really key word there. They have sort of stuck with it throughout its lifespan. What we can sort of look at moving forwards, moving on from Drupal 7 and specifically assessing your own individual needs. Every business is unique, and so it has its unique challenges. So how can we sort of help you assess your own needs within that? Choosing a new platform, and that may well be sticking with Drupal. It may well be looking at another alternative CMS or a different platform as well. If we are staying with Drupal, what does Drupal 10 look like now? How is it different to Drupal 7 rather? And how can we sort of give you a bit of a window into that experience moving forwards? And then basically a summary. What can we do sort of now as actionable next steps? So look, just to start, we wanted to sort of frame this for everybody really. There's still over 300,000 sites globally still using version 7 of Drupal core. We wanted to share this first of all, just to sort of say, you're not alone. You're not on your own. There's still plenty of people running Drupal 7. Obviously, there'll be a range of sites, some very large, some very small, some less complex and some more complex than others. But as I say, really just to sort of frame this, you're not sort of like the exception here. There's still plenty of people, plenty of businesses who are running Drupal 7. But as we know, end of life is coming, and just to sort of give you the detail, if you didn't already know, that end of life will happen on January 5th, 2025. We still have a few months before then, but you're here with us today to sort of try and look at how we address that, and I think the sort of part of the messaging as we run through, as I'm sure we'll sort of highlight, will be we kind of need to start looking at this now. January 25 is not too far away. So first off, why have businesses remained so loyal to Drupal 7 and why we're here? Well, we sort of frame this into sort of 4 reasons really. Number one, bespoke development. You could do quite a lot with Drupal 7. And so that means that, you know, the way it sort of talks to sort of different areas of the business means that it's sort of quite ingrained and sort of intertwined between those. And that leads us nicely onto business processes. It may well be, and still is, a sort of super important part of the sort of whole business operation, really. It's much more than just the sort of website CMS in how it connects to the wider business. We're going to look at cost. Drupal 7 is probably the sort of last of its kind in terms of how you upgrade from it on Drupal, and the cost typically with that can be quite large. And then just sort of look, sort of you guys are out there sort of feeling just a little bit lost. How do we move on from this? It's quite an overwhelming thing moving on from Drupal 7. So how can we sort of help look to sort of guide you through that? David, I'm going to hand over to you. We can sort of look at some of these topics in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, so starting with kind of bespoke development, Drupal 7 in its time was one of it was a great platform for building bespoke functionality quite rapidly. These days, there's tools out there like Airtables and CRMs and kind of cloud-based solutions that you can use to integrate various processes. Those didn't exist when Drupal 7 was around, and it was a great platform for building data structures, creating views, creating forms, and creating kind of customer experiences that were quite powerful, really. And as an example, you might be in a situation where you have built a fairly complicated customer application process for the new user joining journey, or maybe calculating insurance. And that's quite embedded in how your Drupal 7 system works. So your challenge could be that you're looking, well, how can I move away from Drupal 7? But I'm aware that I've got this capability in my website that I'm going to need to have to rebuild. Perhaps you don't have documentation as to how that's written, and you're not sure what you're going to do as the next step. Well, the good news is Drupal is fully open source. So provided you can get a copy of the code, then any agency can have a look at that for you and give you quite a clear plan for how you would rebuild that in a new way. So the next part, maybe you've taken that application form and you've actually then started building out some capability within the Drupal 7 system to manage customer data. Maybe from that initial inquiry, you've then added additional information about the customer. And actually what you're doing there is you're starting to build a customer relationship management system, but you're doing it within your Drupal 7 system. Now, we've had clients where they've come to us because they've got a Drupal 7 system, and they might have, say, 10,000 customers sitting in their Drupal 7 system with a lot of personal data. And the reason they've come to us is to say, can you help us move from moving this personal data out of the website? Because they're aware that GDPR is saying, actually, you shouldn't have this kind of data sitting in the public domain. So the next step, if you're in that situation, is really to look at implementing a CRM and a new website so that you've got that personal data in a more secure location. And possibly your reason why you're still on Drupal 7 is actually cost. You could have had your Drupal 7 website for 10 years, and over that period, let's say you're a charity and you started off with a bit of donations, and then you perhaps have added some kind of adoption of some form. And then for those people that have adopted, you want to give them a members area so that they can experience other services from you. And then maybe you've also got a bit of customer management in there. So actually your Drupal 7 system is quite complex now. And the challenge can be, you've gone to someone to say, well, how much is this going to cost me to rebuild? And they've given you a price, and it's quite a high number. So really your risk here is, what do you do next? Do you rebuild everything in Drupal 10? Do you look at other options? How do you go from where you are now, knowing that you've got to move off Drupal 7? And there's two processes you need to go to at this point. One, you need to be brutally honest about what do you need to keep. What have you got there in there? What have you built in there over the last 10 years that you could perhaps get rid of? And also, are there off-the-shelf solutions that you could integrate that would make the cost of moving and rebuilding your functionality a lot cheaper than trying to rebuild all that custom capability? And lastly, maybe you're feeling lost. Maybe you know, 10 years is a long time to have a website. And maybe you had a developer in-house who built the system for you, but they've left for a higher paid remote developer role with COVID and so forth. And, you know, maybe you found yourself stuck with a site which your business is dependent on. It's got a lot of complexity to it, but you don't know how it's built. You don't know what to do next. You've got hosting, but you haven't really moved the site forward. Well, the great thing about Drupal is it is fully open source. So you can, provided you can get access to a copy of the code and the database and the files, you can give that to an agency and they can give you an assessment of that system to tell you what you've got. There's nothing hidden. They will be able to see everything that's in there and be able to give you a roadmap for how you can move that system forward in the future.
Yeah, these are such great points. And the interesting thing about some of the sort of stuff that we've shared there and that we've highlighted, you know, these are real life examples from some of the clients that we have at CTI. This is the feedback that we've been getting. These are the sort of challenges and things that we've been trying to address with them. So it's been lovely to sort of be able to sort of share some of this information with you here today as well, because as I say, they are sort of taken from real life examples. So look, we've gone through some of the sort of the reasons why folks have remained loyal to Drupal 7. The sort of, and now we're sort of going to look at moving on from Drupal 7 in a little bit more detail and sort of process really and next steps. So David sort of alluded to it on the last couple of slides there. I think the first thing we need to be doing is taking stock of where you are now and what you actually need. We sort of talked specifically about being brutal. I think it's a great time to sort of assess what is the website actually doing for you right now. What is it doing now versus 10 years ago, and actually what does it need to do for you moving forwards? We've got a sort of section there on tidying up. Do you actually need all of the content, data, integrations that you had or that you've added to the site over the last number of years? How do we sort of look at creating a roadmap and the things that we might consider when building that roadmap out? And ultimately, how do we sort of help you and sort of understand how we might move forwards away from Drupal 7?
So first step, as James has mentioned, first thing you need to do is really take stock, get a really good audit of what you've got. So you need to understand, you need to kind of make a list of what content have you got on the website, how many users have you got, what types of users, what kind of forms have you got. It's highly likely that because you can build forms quite easily in Drupal 7, you may have created a whole load of kind of customer inquiry forms that are actually no longer required because they were for a 2017 campaign. Also, you need to get a good sense of what are the integrations that you're using, because when you move forward, you're going to need to make sure that those integrations still work. One of the things that was quite easy to build in Drupal 7 was the concept called feeds, whereby you could expose parts of the Drupal 7 data to allow other systems to work. So you need to make sure when you take this Drupal 7 system away, that those other systems are still going to work. Also, what features have you got? Because it might be there's some functionality in there that you trialed, and then, you know, it's a 10-year period, so it's likely that some of those features are no longer needed, so could be turned off and don't need to be part of the new solution. So having, sorry, yeah, on the taking stock, one of the things to consider is content in quite a big way. So I've worked with local authorities, for example, where their website has grown over, say, 5 years, and they often do a cull and they have a new website, and they can bring the content down to around 700 pages. And then over a few years of a process, a local authority produces a lot of content, and they like to put it on the website, new housing policies, new applications, new ways of doing things. And, you know, quite often these sites grow up to, say, 5,000 pages in size. And they really need to use a tool like Screaming Frog SEO Spider, which you can then use to audit your whole site, create a list of the content, and get a sense of what do you actually need to keep. The benefit of doing this now is it will save you a lot of time and money in the future if you've got a much smaller footprint for what you need to move into the next system. So the next thing is tidying up. And there's nothing stopping you doing this now, which is something to consider. So you know, what, as I mentioned, what you're looking to do is save money in the total scheme of things. And what you may need to do is create a scorecard approach for how you're going to do this evaluation of what you've got. One of the best tools to use for this is to turn on Google Analytics and kind of dig into the page views and look at how many people have been looking at pages over the last 6 months. If you've got content on your website that no one's looked at in the last 6 months, that's a great candidate to be removed. That content doesn't need to be there. Likewise, if you've got users who've been on the website for over 2 years and they haven't logged in recently, do they still need to be a user? Do you need to migrate them over? Yeah, are you holding data that you don't need to? From a GDPR point of view, you really need to be optimal in what you're holding. And then really start to take a backup and then start deleting, start getting rid of all of this content. It'll make you feel better. It will help you with a much smaller kind of content management in general. And it will make your move to the next step much easier. Now, as I mentioned, for some websites, this is actually going to be quite a big process. So it'll be really important to have a roadmap for how you're going to get there. One of the other things to consider is a bit like tidying your house. This is not an exciting job. So it's really important to try and share that work out amongst other people, have a plan and try and stick to that plan, because the reality is this kind of sorting out your content will be one of the biggest parts of your move to the next system. And it does take time, and January 2025 isn't far away really, when you consider you probably need to allow 6 months for the rebuild into whatever it is you're going to build your current site into. So moving forward, one thing to consider is change isn't easy. No one really enjoys change, and especially your customers. So if you and your staff, if you've built up functionality which people are depending on and using regularly, then launching a new website will absolutely tank your conversion of that customer experience. So you really need to consider how are you going to introduce that change. If you're introducing, say, content changes, it might be worth restructuring how you've got it. It might be worth doing that on your current Drupal system rather than on your future CMS, so that you are phasing out how you're doing that change. Lastly, some of this stuff can feel quite difficult to know what you've got, how to audit. Maybe you aren't used to using the content management system administration area, or you don't have technical people in your team that can do this. At this point, what you really want to do is get in contact with an agency like CTI, and they can help you understand what you've got and consider what you need to do for the future.
Yes, again, such great points, and I think again, just sort of thinking about the experiences that we've had here, and this goes actually for when you're sort of considering rebuilding any site, but it's a great opportunity. We're sort of alluding to it there in terms of users, to talk to your audience, understand the users, think about personas, what those different audience and user needs are. It's a great time to be doing that as part of a new website project and a new build. Again, those users might have different needs and expectations versus when the website was initially launched. And ultimately, as businesses, we often have our own sort of thoughts and expectations as to what the website needs to do and how it needs to operate and how it speaks to the audience. But ultimately, we'll never be as informed as those users, as the audience themselves. So it's a great opportunity to sort of look at that and gather that information as part of the sort of new website that we're looking at. So look, we're now sort of going to move on to assessing your needs, which I've sort of alluded to there. And we have sort of a split really between business needs and technical needs. The business needs, really, we're sort of thinking about how the CMS fits into the wider digital and marketing ecosystem. We sort of touched there on your audience and your users being key and sort of highly important. We'll look at technical needs, how it needs to talk to other sort of integrations that you have internally. That might be sort of CRM systems, etc. We'll consider budget constraints that you may have as part of building a new website and moving on from Drupal 7. And finally, just some other things that you might think to consider as part of this process.
So the first one here, your business needs. Obviously, the most important thing for your website is customer experience. So, make sure you are understanding your customers, trying to get feedback from them. What are the things that they find easy to use on the website? But equally, what are the things that they find frustrating? Because this is a great opportunity to improve those features and improve your conversion rate, because you're going to have to rebuild it. So rebuild it better if you can. Secondly, editors. Now, editors are like they're kind of the forgotten user when you build a new website, which is really unfortunate, because actually it's the editors who probably spend their most amount of their time on your website, creating content, managing content, trying to target things for new customer segments and audiences. But actually, often the tools we give them aren't really fit for purpose. We spend much more of our development effort trying to make the customer experience great, rather than thinking how to support the editors. But if you can spend time supporting the editors, then they can create better pages, because they're spending more of their time thinking about content creation rather than how do I get this to work in the CMS. And particularly in Drupal 7, the way you built kind of structured and modular pages was really quite difficult. It wasn't really fit for purpose for that point of view. And that's something that in the future content management systems, particularly Drupal 10, those kind of challenges have been addressed. But really think about the editor experience. I'm a big champion for kind of supporting them. The next thing is your business requirements. As we talked about, you might have built into your Drupal 7 system processes and functionality that is really part of how your business operates. So you need to consider, how are you going to migrate away from that dependency, and what systems are you going to build that in? And then lastly, we need to think about reporting and management. So that could be content management, that could be user management. And then from a reporting side, do you know which parts of the website customers are using, how they're engaging with it? Equally, if you've built some of your kind of CRM-like business processes into the Drupal 7 system, you may well have some reporting functionality also that's been built into the Drupal 7 system. So you need to think about how are you going to rebuild those views and dashboards that you've created in a future world. So the next thing to think about is your technical needs. From a technical perspective, you've got a whole body of content sitting in your website in some form of structured orientation. As I mentioned, Drupal 7 wasn't the best for building kind of modular pages. So getting a good understanding of how that's been built is useful, and thinking about what that needs to look like in the future. Likewise, Drupal's always been fantastic for international websites. So the multilingual translation that you've got sitting in there needs consideration as to how you're going to move that over. Next thing is customer data. As I've mentioned a couple of times, things like GDPR, they weren't around 10 years ago when Drupal 7 came out. And it was a habit that businesses started to build more kind of capability into their content management system around managing customer data, and often might add personal notes in there about customers, or personal information that was more about managing the customer relationship as a business. Now today, the ICO would consider that a risk from a data breach point of view, because any security organization is going to tell you not to store data in a public layer, in a publicly accessible internet layer. So really you need to be considering moving that customer data into a separate system that's part of your infrastructure. You then need to look at your integrations. One of the things that Drupal 7 gets very used for is integrating with other platforms. And it's likely that you've already got an integration with a CRM or a digital asset management system or product information management system, or maybe single sign-on and how it integrates, or some bespoke integrations in what you do as part of maybe a scheduled job process that's all been built in the Drupal 7 system. We've been working recently with a hospitality, a hotel chain, who have got a very big Drupal 7 system, caches a lot of data in it locally, has a lot of the business function in it, And their plan for moving away from Drupal 7 needs to be quite a scaled approach. And lastly, customization. Drupal 7 was a great platform for building all kinds of systems. I know I've personally built a variety of things that aren't really websites, they're more web applications. You can do customization in the administration area, you can do customization in how the customer experience works, and you can do customization in the kind of processing side. All of that's written as code, and that code isn't going to be compatible with your next system, so that needs to be carefully planned and considered how you're going to move that forward. Okay, then you obviously want to consider your budget constraints. Ideally, you want to spend as little as possible moving from Drupal 7 to the next system. And the way you're going to save money is by being as pragmatic as possible. Try and make a good compromise between what you need and what you don't need. The best way to do that is to do a Moscow rating. So figure out what you must have, what you should have, what you could have, and what you definitely don't need. And then really just consider what you must and should have and try and drop the coulds and woulds. Also, try and do this in a phased approach. If you can build your new solution and launch it before you have to turn off your old site, it might be that you can, to support your existing customers, you can give them the option to work in both systems, whether they want to work in the new world or the old world. And that can help with customer experience and getting used to adapting to the new ways of working. Also, consider what content needs to be migrated at what time. So you may, for example, find that, well, typically on like a large information website, 80% of the traffic only uses about 20% of the content. So that becomes your high priority content to move over initially, and then maybe you move the other content over later. And a big thing to consider, if you likely got news and events on your website over the last 10 years, how much of that do you need to keep? Can you remove big chunks of that? And maybe if you do need to move it over, how important is it? And can it be done at a later stage? And then lastly, one of the best ways to save money is to do as much of this work as you can yourself with your internal team. They'll know your systems, they'll know what's important content, and they can help. They can do the content migration, they might be able to scope out and plan the new functionality. A good agency will always be willing to work with you in a blended form so that you run new projects with a mix of internal staff and agency staff.
David, it's such a great point on the sort of phased approach there. I know certainly when I've sort of been speaking to clients, it always feels like a bit of an eye-opener. Like there's always this sort of expectation that actually building a new website has to be another sort of big bang in itself. It's sort of launched and it's ready to go. We sort of drop one and move straight onto the other. Do you find as well, sort of speaking to clients, they don't always consider a phased approach, and actually that, and you sort of touched on it there, but that phased approach can be super helpful when we're considering budget, time, resource, availability, all of those.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. I think particularly internally with management, there can be a desire to see a big change. They've invested a lot of money and they want to see a return on that, and part of that is a big bang of a new customer experience. The reality is that customer experience is often it's going to initially drop conversion while people get used to the new ways of working. It's also quite a risk because it might not be, until you've actually tried it, it might not be as successful as you think. One of the places where I've seen phased migration working really well has been in local authorities. So, for example, a council might move over the home page and a couple of key sections. So maybe they move over the council tax section and the housing and planning section, but they'll leave some of the other sections on the old CMS in the old page format and then move those over slowly. And it just helps them spread out that effort required to do the content migration into the new CMS. So things to consider as kind of part of this process as I guess some of these are non-technical requirements and non-functional requirements. So data security, really be quite ruthless about what kind of data are you storing about customers, particularly, but also maybe your commercial data. Are you putting a lot of commercial data at risk by having it sitting in the web layer? Would it be better to call it when it's required? As an example, if you're managing, say, university staff profiles, well, all of that content is likely to end up on the public page anyway. So there's no problem at all with having university staff profiles in the sort of content management system and publicly available. But if you've also perhaps got students and their results and evaluations that you've done of those students, that is very sensitive personal data that really shouldn't be sitting in a website and should really be called in from an external system. Think about your future needs. It's easy to focus on what you need today, or kind of replacing the current system, but the reality is you're probably going to be with this new system for at least 5 years. So think about what are going to be your needs in 5 years' time. If, say, for example, you've got 2,000 customers at the minute, well, hopefully in 5 years' time, you might have 10,000 customers, and therefore build systems that are appropriate to manage that capability, that kind of capacity. The next one, think about training of staff. Take time to consider how your different types of users and what types of training they need. And that might include some of your customer base. If you have a dealer network who are dependent on using your platform for the sales that they resell for you, then consider how you're going to give guidance and training to that audience. Sometimes there are, audiences that aren't immediately obvious that will need training. And then lastly, as we mentioned a couple of times, think about that impact. This is going to be a change. And ideally you want to soft launch that change. And sometimes that could be a challenge with senior management, as I've mentioned. And one way to reduce that impact is to say, okay, this new transformation project, we're going to be delivering it in 5 phases. Phase 1, you're going to see this change. Phase 2, you're going to see that change. And you can tell the management what they can expect to see at each level of change. And that way you can soften the delivery and the amount of change happening at any one time, but still show the cost benefit of the investment.
Okay, so we're sort of getting to the stage now where, as a business, we've sort of evaluated what we've got. We're sort of talking to our audience. We're thinking about internal stakeholders. We're thinking about budgets, phased approach. I guess it starts to get to some of the exciting stuff when we're thinking about CMS specifically and choosing a new platform, right? So we've sort of looked at this, and again, this is from our experiences with clients. That platform may well be Drupal 10. There are still many advantages. Drupal 10 remains one of the strongest CMS platform choices available, and we'll sort of come on to that in a little bit later. But for your particular business needs, for your particular project and budget, there are other CMS choices that you may wish to consider as part of this process as well. And irrespective of that sort of CMS choice, we're also going to sort of dive a little bit into maybe some enterprise features that could be under consideration, again, depending on your business needs, and also the sort of off-the-shelf versus more bespoke needs as well.
Okay, so starting with Drupal 10, we've been doing a lot of Drupal 10 builds recently. It is a natural evolution, whether you're on Drupal 7, 8, or 9, to consider Drupal 10. And the current version of Drupal really does move forward the customer experience, the editorial experience. It's got a nice content migration plan, whether you're going from Drupal 7 to Drupal 10. And it is a great consideration. So from a customer experience perspective, how people interact with websites has changed quite significantly in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, it wasn't a mobile-first default experience. Today, you can expect that most customers are going to be coming to their website on a smartphone of some form. Secondly, web accessibility and WCAG guidelines, if you're in the if you're in the government domain or you're trying to reach a wide audience, considering accessibility both from a device perspective, an individual's perspective, and also possibly aligned with the mobile requirement is where and when are they trying to access it? Making the interface simpler can help if someone's trying to access it while they're on the bus or the tube, or there's various things to consider. The great thing about Drupal 10 is they really have looked at the way pages are being created, the requirement to create more modular pages with content reuse across multiple pages, more structure. And out of the box, Drupal 10 really does have a good collection of features to enable you to do that, especially compared to Drupal 7, where it was possible in Drupal 7, but as we're about to get onto, the editor experience was really poor. So editor experience. Drupal 10, one of the big changes between Drupal 9 and Drupal 10 is they've introduced a new backend administration theme, and that's been highly geared around resolving current frustrations and issues for editors in how they manage the content. Drupal has always been a large content management system, and that capability was not necessarily hidden. So it was a bit like Word when you've got your toolbar with 50 icons on it. Everything was available to anyone using the system. But for someone who was just an editor who knew about content management but couldn't care less about how you build a website, the administration area was quite overwhelming, and the new administration area has been simplified to help people focus on the art of content creation rather than on how the website works and functions. Next point, content migration. One of the good things is there is an automated route to move content from Drupal 7 to Drupal 10. There would need to be consideration on how you might be restructuring how you're building some of your kind of landing pages. Those are less likely to be something that you could automate the migration of. But if you're moving, say, a body of news articles or a body of factual information, that could very easily be moved through automation from Drupal 7 to Drupal 10. And the last thing to consider is, although these systems are called Drupal 7, Drupal 8, Drupal 9, Drupal 10, Drupal 7 versus 8, 9, and 10, it's a very different beast. When Drupal moved away from building all of the code themselves, which is what they had in Drupal 7, the community maintained quite a large stack of functionality. They moved over to the Symfony framework so that they could focus the Drupal community's efforts on building a great content management system rather than building all the kind of foundations and nuts and bolts that you need in order to work on the internet. So when you're considering the fact, you might have functionality that you've got in Drupal 7, and you're like, well, can you just lift that and put it into Drupal 10? It's highly likely that's going to need to be rebuilt from scratch. So there is always going to be a cost involved with any customization that you've got, whether that's in the theme layer or it's in custom modules that have been built. And the last thing to consider just on that point is Drupal isn't for everyone. It is a big, expensive content management system. It's great if you need the functionality. It's not so great if you don't. It is going to come with an ongoing cost to maintain and manage, and you might be better considering a lighter content management system as your next step. Okay. So, other content management systems that you can consider. If your website's quite small, if you don't have many editors, if it's not multilingual, if you don't need workflow, if you don't really have a members area, then WordPress could be a great candidate for what you need, especially if you don't have a particularly high security requirement. One of the benefits of Drupal is the security advisory group provide security cover, not just for Drupal, but also for the related modules. With WordPress, you've got security cover for the core, but not necessarily the community created modules. So WordPress is a great option if you need a small kind of website, but there are things to consider in adopting that. Next, Umbraco. Umbraco is kind of the Microsoft .NET equivalent to Drupal. It's a great platform. It works really well with Microsoft technologies. If you're already in the Azure stack, then working with Umbraco, there's going to be some advantages and things that you can integrate more easily. The only thing to consider about Umbraco is the Drupal community is very open source and very much free to use kind of mentality and an academic scientific community. Drupal's been identified as or recognized by the United Nations as a for good service, which means it gets funding to make sure that it's available to help the wider community. Umbraco doesn't have that same infrastructure around it, and often people that have developed kind of more complex functionality, there'll be a license fee for using some of that functionality. So for example, if you want to use Umbraco Workflow, you're probably going to have an annual license fee to use that. If you want to use a particular theme, you may have a license fee for that. So it's a brilliant platform. It's very capable, but there is a license fee consideration for it, for some of the advanced features. Another really good thing to consider is Adobe Commerce. Drupal has been used for building shops. I've certainly built some e-commerce shops on it in the past. But Magento, or as it's now called Adobe Commerce, is probably a better fit if you are purely looking for an e-commerce solution. Where I've found there can be some limitations with Drupal Commerce is when you're wanting to add offers and gift codes and kind of redemption vouchers, that kind of thing. Adobe Commerce is going to have more of that functionality out of the box, whereas Drupal, you may need to build that bespoke. So it's kind of a consideration for sure if you're looking at e-commerce. And then lastly, we have Optimizely. Optimizely is an A/B testing platform, but they built now within it a lot of really good CMS functionality. And so that's actually a consideration. If you've got a small amount of content and you're doing a lot of multivariant testing and you want to kind of keep moving the experience forward, and you have digital marketers who have those capabilities and know what they're doing with kind of that A/B testing, then Optimizely is a really good consideration as well. It's a more natural digital experience platform than Drupal is. So next, we're talking about enterprise features. So quite often people have built functionality in Drupal 7, and then over the last 10 years, they've had a successful business that has grown, and you've now got a lot more users, a lot more content, and a lot more assets that you're managing, but a lot more consideration. Particularly, for example, let's say you're a children's charity. You may have, or you're working with young people. You might have started tracking some of the activities and the impact that you're doing in the Drupal solution. But that personal data really shouldn't sit there. You really need to be looking at setting up a customer relationship management system and moving that personal data out and into the CRM and calling it in when you need it. Likewise, you may have a collection of photos of children, but actually you need to make sure you've got the right permissions to use those children's photos on different parts of the website, and they might be time-based as to how long you can use it. Drupal, you could hack that functionality, you could build it on top, but you'd be better to consider a digital asset management system where you've got all of that functionality built in for license management and ensuring you've got permission for the different types of use of images. So having a digital asset management system might be a good consideration if that's what you've been doing. Next, maybe you've got a really large product database, and I've seen people use Drupal to build, because it's got a good data structure and views and ability to do processing. It is quite a good base for building out a product database, but actually there's off-the-shelf solutions for that. A product information management system, they're called PIM, and those are going to have out-of-the-box features that just make it easier and then mean that your kind of future cost of ownership is going to be less because you're not going to need to upgrade and maintain that custom functionality. Lastly, single sign-on. If you've got a simple use for single sign-on, then Drupal is a great way of enabling you to have ability to log into one website, but then use it across multiple sites. But when you want to start looking at things like multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication and a larger user base and how you manage users and permissions across multiple services, really you need to start looking at a dedicated single sign-on provider and then integrating that across your website platforms. Lastly, maybe your website's not really a website at all. Maybe it's a bespoke web application and you just happen to use Drupal because it was useful at the time. There are some really interesting alternatives to that now. Node.js is great if you've got a website or you're providing a web experience where the page loads and then it calls in lots of other data sources to build a dashboard of some form. Maybe that's a weather forecast or it's a stocks and shares platform. Node.js is really good at aggregating content and then presenting it to users and allowing a customer-driven experience. Secondly, maybe you're starting to look at more multi-channel servicing of your content. So you're feeding it out to multiple systems, particularly because there's now so many ways that people consume content. And therefore, Drupal's still great as an editorial management platform. And maybe you just want to use Drupal for that capability, but then make it headless and connect everything else via APIs. Next thing, maybe you've actually built a kind of mobile application using your platform. One of the challenges is you're not going to be able to create as native mobile functionality as using what's called a progressive web app. So a progressive web app allows you to build a mobile phone geared application. It's going to run through the internet, but it's going to appear on the person's mobile device. But whether they are using an Android device or an iOS Apple device, they will get the right controls and features. And so you can get a better customer experience if you're using a progressive web app platform. If all of those things feel a bit confusing, please do come and speak to us and we can help you decipher what your needs may be and how you might approach that in the future.
Yeah, thanks, David. Okay, so we've considered different platform choices there, but as David sort of alluded to and highlighted, there are efficiencies and advantages to remaining with the sort of Drupal CMS platform. So we're just going to sort of talk about what's new in Drupal 10. Some of this we've sort of covered off already, and actually we're specifically going to look at how it's even better actually than Drupal 9. We sort of talked about how it's different to Drupal 7, but even moving on from Drupal 9, there's another sort of raft of sort of benefits that are really sort of great for businesses and organizations. Drupal remains really secure in terms of a platform, which is obviously a key consideration for businesses. We talked about the fact that it's open source and sort of free and available in that respect. But I think one of the sort of biggest benefits and the power of Drupal actually comes from its community. We talked about the sort of hundreds of thousands, quite frankly, people who contribute to Drupal every single day, every year, and that really is the sort of power of the sort of the community that they have there, and it really is a robust and secure CMS, and it remains in that respect. We've also sort of talked about the sort of experience for the marketers and the users. The editorial experience is very different to Drupal 7. Where it's perhaps more sort of geared to the more technically minded or even developers. And actually sort of thinking about the last few years, I think it's fair to say that some businesses have moved away from Drupal just purely down to that editorial and content manager experience from the user's point of view, from the marketer's side, which is a shame really, because it remains sort of very capable platform. It's brilliant at what it does. But to sort of have people move away just because of that, well, look, they've addressed that now. They've spoken to users. It's a great place to be. I'm going to come on to that in a couple of slides time as well. But from an editing experience and sort of back end experience for the marketer, for the user, it's in a great place now. Themes, yeah, as we sort of mentioned there, they've introduced new starter kits and tools that are sort of out the box, gives you a look and feel for what the site and the themes can sort of begin to look like. And it remains compliant with web content and accessibility guidelines, moving on from 2.1 to 2.2 in the last few months there as well. It remains highly scalable. So if you're looking at a sort of 5-year plus roadmap, Drupal is a great CMS choice because of its scalability. It can grow with you and grow with the business. It remains multi-site, multilingual, depending on what you need. And as we sort of said there, it can grow with you and your business. And just to sort of summarize on that, as I said at the beginning, even when we compare this to Drupal 9, never mind Drupal 7, it's just a lot easier to work with. So we just wanted to sort of showcase a couple of examples, really. It really does have a sort of clean, easy to use interface, something that you would expect in 2024 when we're sort of considering adding content and what that might look like, being able to sort of publish that to test environments so you can actually see exactly what that's going to look like on the website. And depending on what you need as a business and sort of how the sort of the estate that you have looks and feels, publishing it in one area of the sort of the CMS can immediately sort of roll out to other areas as well. So there's time and efficiency savings to be had there. So look, as we sort of showcase here, really flexible layouts, drag and drop functionality, which is great. It's really consistent. And we sort of touched on training a little bit earlier on in the presentation. Drupal's in a great position now for us as agency or developers to be able to empower you, the users, to be able to use this platform so that you're relying on agency and sort of being able to spend your money on other areas such as improvements, or looking at the sort of wider digital estate as opposed to having to rely on developers just to sort of move around content within the CMS, which may have been the case more historically. You're really empowered to be able to do this now, and you're in a position where moving content around depending on sort of different permissions and things is a really simple thing. Media library as well, when we sort of touched on it again throughout the sort of presentation, but in terms of asset management, it's a great tool. We can sort of look to integrate with different page components. In terms of tracking as well, again, we can sort of Drupal allows you to sort of track the performance of content across and sort of throughout the website, especially when it's sort of talking to other analytics tools as well. And we sort of worked here at sort of CTI to consider what components and features and functionality businesses typically need out of the box. So obviously, as I mentioned earlier, every business is unique and has its own unique challenges, but there are typically the same types of functionality and features that businesses need. So when it comes to component library and thinking about headers, carousels, what you see is what you get in terms of rich text, call to actions, all of the stuff that you can sort of see on the left-hand side. It's quite easy to deliver these from Drupal now out of the box. We can certainly do that for you here at CTI. Even sort of thinking about wider integrations with the likes of Google Maps, social media as well, plus, as it says there, any others that are specific to you. So Drupal 10, it gives you all of the sort of advantages and benefits that it's sort of had progressing from Drupal 7, 8, and 9, but it's just as we said, it's just a much easier place to be, much nicer place to be, especially when it comes to the marketers and the people that are using that content. So what to do now? Well, I guess the sort of next steps really are obviously aligned to January 25. As we mentioned right at the beginning, there's still a few months. There's still a good few months when it comes to sort of considering the sort of next sort of website build for you. But David, I'll just pass back to you just to sort of run through some of these.
Yeah, I think the reality is, if you're still on Drupal 7, there is undoubtedly going to be a reason why you're still here. If your challenge is you haven't got the budget to move away from Drupal 7, speak to an agency and they can help you come up with a plan for how you can do it in a cost-effective fashion. And you probably need to be fairly ruthless about what you move, what you leave, and whether you can take cheaper options, maybe more things that are off the shelf, to enable you to move away. And there can be some serious gains to be made there. For example, you can set up CRMs don't have to be expensive. There's a great solution called Civi CRM, which is open source and available. It doesn't have to be Microsoft Dynamics 365 or HubSpot. There are some that don't have a big license fee associated to them, and your needs might not need all of that capability. But it's really important to start doing something and make a plan and get ready, because ultimately after January 2025, your Drupal 7 solution as it stands won't be Cyber Essentials compliant, which is a concern for any business or organization. Next step, obviously the first step in that plan is taking stock, figuring out what you've got, figuring out what you need to keep, being brutally honest, and getting ready for the next step. Then creating a timeline that you can work to and speak to a developer to find out how long it's going to take to build that new solution. Don't underestimate the time it will take to rebuild functionality, to do the testing, to do the content migration. That can't start until the build's been finished. And then you need to do the kind of testing to check that it's going to be ready to go live by January 2025. And lastly, one of the really important things to do is to make sure that you don't go backwards. So set up some Google Analytic dashboards and kind of funnel tracking that assesses your current conversion rates and your current volume of traffic, and also consider things like SEO, where how much traffic are you getting from different content sources, so that you can measure, hopefully, the improvement that you're getting in launching the website. The new website should be quicker. It should be more aligned to customer experience for today, because it's going to be built on a newer and a fresher platform. And you can use that to demonstrate the impact of your investment, because there's going to be a cost to this. But also, it's really important that you capture customer feedback. You may find that you've done something inadvertently that means actually the new process doesn't work. So capturing real customer feedback and maybe doing some trials with users to see how they find it, of your kind of known best customers, to see whether you've overlooked something, or a way that they've used it that you weren't fully expecting. So yeah, making sure it's kind of a customer and feedback led move forward.
Yeah, thanks, David. So look, we are actually at the end of time there. So we'll look to address sort of questions that have come through in the chat. And obviously you can feel free to follow up with David and I in terms of any other questions that you want to send through via email. Hopefully you found this useful. I know we've certainly enjoyed putting this together based on our experiences with clients here at CTI. David, thank you very much for your time and your contribution. Hopefully you enjoyed that too.
Yeah, no, it's been an excellent session. And we get that it's a big question and it's a big challenge, and we're really keen to support. All the people that work at CTI are very passionate about Drupal, and we like to kind of support the community, as well as obviously getting some commercial value for ourselves.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, look, as I say, thank you all for joining us. The recording will be sent out, so you can catch up or watch again in your own time. And we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you.